On today's podcast, we're talking about the power of habits as they relate to our own leadership, the culture we form with the people around us, and in our personal lives and our work lives. Habits are some of the most powerful pieces in leadership and culture shaping. A little later in the podcast, we're going to talk about Warren Buffett and his language around habits become chains, and we'll dive into that a little bit later on.
Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you are here. So glad you have made time in your day, in your week, in your month to dive into some of these podcasts and join us in this conversation. We are in season 8, believe it or not, well over 210 episodes, I think it is now, and so excited. The response from listeners has been fantastic. So glad that this continues to resonate with people. And I hope wherever you are, this message today finds you. And as always, I want this to be a place and a space in your life, in your day, for you to step back, for you to think, and for you to be filled with some, hopefully a little good oxygen breathed into you so you can think about your life, your work, the cultures that you're creating with the people around you. So I'm more convinced of this than ever that we need leaders, authentic leaders, compelling leaders, leaders that are building relationships with people and creating compelling cultures. That is a differentiator. Not only is that just needed and helpful in the world, but that's a differentiator within organizations. So glad that you're here and joining the conversation today. If you'll do me the quick favor before we get started, if you'll rate the podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to, that is hugely helpful. So even just taking a moment, literally a moment, to say 5 stars, that is super helpful to help other people find this podcast. If you'll leave a review in your own authentic words, saying what resonated with you, that also helps people find the podcast, that helps the algorithms work. And obviously, anybody who takes the time to invite other people to be a part of this, share it with your networks, whether that's social media or at your work, saying, hey, here's a topic we ought to talk about as a team or think about, and share episodes that resonate with you. Those are the ways in which these messages are amplified further in the world. So thank you to everybody who takes a moment to do that. So today we're talking about habits. And what we know about habits is that every human on the planet has good habits and maybe some not so good habits. And I'd say that without judgment whatsoever. A little later in the podcast, we're going to talk about Warren Buffett and his language around how habits, the good ones, become chains that really hold us in place and help us anchor ourselves in the good habits. But they can also be chains that hold us, unfortunately, stuck in bad habits as well. And we'll dive into that a little bit later on. But when we talk about habits, we're entering this, of course, with no judgment whatsoever. But all we want to make sure that we're thinking about is that we recognize that all of us, how we move throughout our days, our work, our lives, our relationships, certainly our operations with the people on our teams, all of us create habits. And what I mean by good and bad habits, again, that's up for you to judge for yourself, what you might see in yourself, what are good or bad, but is that we all have habits that support either the vision we have for ourselves and who we're hoping to be in our life and work. And we also have picked up some, quote unquote, bad habits or things that are counter to what we say we want that perhaps make it harder for us to be the people we want to be in our life and work. So habits, again, in the good sense, help us follow through and help keep us in line with what we're trying to accomplish individually or as a team. And also, we know that there are habits that we form as individuals and collectively as teams that sometimes get in the way of that vision that we have for the future. So I hope that makes sense to you. Of course, we can all sit back and judge kind of good or bad, and that might be obvious. But today isn't about that. It's about each of us stepping back and looking at how we operate and to be able to think about what are those habits in your everyday life and certainly within your team or organization you serve, and what are the ones that help you, support that which we're trying to build, and which are the ones that might be keeping you stuck or holding you back. So, on today's podcast, we're talking about the power of habits as they relate to our own leadership, the culture we form with the people around us, and in our personal lives and our work lives. Habits are some of the most powerful pieces in leadership and culture shaping, and that's what we'll dive into today. But before we do that, let's take a quick break, take a quick pause, and we'll be right back.
Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
So again, we're talking about habits today. And again, every human on the planet has habits that might be what they would consider to be good habits, habits that help them and keep them in alignment with that person or that project or the things they're trying to accomplish. They also may have habits that they would deem to be not so helpful habits or bad habits, habits that they formed, modes of operation that they've gotten into that keep them maybe stuck or get in the way of them accomplishing or becoming the person or whatever the pursuit might be. So today isn't about judgment for that, but it is identifying that all of us individually and certainly collectively as teams, we get into habits that we have and we form with each other, and some of them are supporting what we want and some of them are getting in the way. So today we want to dive into that and talk about what not only is the awareness that we need, but what might we do as we begin to adjust or think about what are those habits that we want to be chained to. So Warren Buffett, and where this language around the chains of habit came from, is Warren Buffett, the famous investor and entrepreneurial genius, some people would call him. But Warren Buffett once said, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. I'll say that again. The chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. And so this is, again, true for both good, bad, or positive, negative, however you want to think about the habits that we form individually or collectively. The good or the positive habits that would support that person or that project or how we function as a team that we want over time, that those habits we form over time become so strong and helpful to us that they are hard to be broken. And so they help lead us through during challenging times. And so those chains of the good habits that we put into place, they help kind of hold us in place, help keep us tethered to that which we want to be, to become. And oftentimes when they're good and they're helpful, we don't even recognize they're there. We've gotten into these. And so that's the part of the chains of habit are too light to be felt. And when we're in a good rhythm, we're in a good flow, either personally or collectively as a team, oftentimes those habits we formed, it's hard to maybe recognize the ones that are helping us. They're a little too light to be felt, but yet they're keeping us in alignment with that future that we're trying to create. And then we also know that there are some of the bad habits or things, maybe negative habits or ways of operating or personal habits or collective habits that we form that maybe get in the way of that future that we're trying to create. And sometimes those are the ones that actually the chains start to weigh us down. And during challenging times or we get to a point where, again, maybe the good habits have been too light to be felt, but then later on as we get into it and we start to look at what is bogging us down, that sometimes when we step back and we look at our own personal habits or our habits as a team, we start to recognize that it's those bad habits that we've formed or those ones that maybe are counter to the type of person and or team that we're hoping to become, that the chains of those habits have become so heavy and so we've become so entrenched, they become so routine that sometimes they feel too heavy to be broken. And so I think that's what Warren Buffett was talking about when he said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. And so what are those habits that are good and helpful to us, and what are those ones that maybe are getting us becoming such a routine that they are getting heavier and heavier and kind of bogging us down? As James Clear, the author of the best-selling book, Atomic Habits, James and I had coffee not too long ago. Really interesting guy. We both spoke at an event. We're both Denison University alums, so it was great to be able to both be a part of an event not too long ago at Denison and speak to entrepreneurs and alumni and students there. It was really, really fun to see, and also to see him in action and talking about not only his book, Atomic Habits, but just talking about this idea of habits, that oftentimes all of us, the problem isn't, us individually. Again, this isn't about judgment of whether you're a good or bad person, but it's your system. And it's the system you've formed and the habits you've formed of the way you do things. And so, you aren't looking at and designing a system of habits that are intended to support your best self or the outcomes you hope for. And so sometimes we as individually or as teams, we don't step back and think about, it's not about whether or not we're good or bad people or good or bad teams. It's, do we have a system of habits in place that are supporting that person, that leadership, that team that we're hoping to become? And so James talks about standardizing before optimizing. That's one of his phrases when you're looking at designing a system of habits. Standardizing before optimizing. Focusing on small adjustments to your habits that will help them become standard. Again, routine. They become just the way that you do it. And then you have to standardize it before you focus on optimizing it. Sometimes we want to make things perfect right away. And what he's saying is, as studying people and groups that have gotten into creating strong and healthy habits, they standardize the habit, they make it a standard, and then they optimize it as they go. They don't wait for it to be perfect. They standardize before optimizing. So I wanted to talk about that idea and this idea of the chains of habit and how it relates to leadership and our own culture shaping. And I'm going to acknowledge some of the terminology that you've heard on past episodes on this podcast and invite you to go back and listen to those full episodes again, because some of these topics I dive very deeply into. So you can go listen to the exact episode. And the first one relates to our personal biorhythm. And I've talked about this. And again, there's a whole episode that I've done on personal biorhythms that you can go back and listen to. But as it relates to our own personal leadership and the habits that we form and the things we know about ourselves, and also how that impacts our team and the people around us. But personal, biorhythm is about being aware of your own rhythm that you experience in your body, and all of us have a unique biorhythm. And during an average day and an average week, when are your energy levels typically high? When you have your most creative and most fulfilling energy? And when in an average day and an average week do you tend to have your low points of energy and creative energy? And the reality is we all have them. It's not as if we are robots and so we have the same amount of energy every single day and every single week and every single month. We, of course, know that. We're not robots. But oftentimes we haven't stepped back to think about the fact that we might have a unique personal biorhythm. And again, invite you to go back and listen to that full episode because it'll give you even more context for what we're talking about today. But for those of you that are listening, you're like, okay, I remember that idea, that concept. I've written about it in my book, Breathing Oxygen, and certainly referenced it in other places as well. We know that we all have this unique rhythm. And so to be able to step back and recognize, when are we at our creative best? When does, and so how do we leverage that great energy that we have? And what are the habits that we put and the standards we form, the designing of our structure for ourselves personally and as a team so that we can really leverage the best energy that we have? And when does our brain need to reboot? When do we know that we have lower energy? And when is it that we need to deploy strategies and systems and habits to help the support of our own awareness of when we're at our best and when we're maybe needing a time to recover and rest so that we can be at our best when our best is needed. And the habits we form and how we design structures to put around ourselves will help us either leverage that great energy we have, or we'll miss it and maybe waste it on things we don't need to do, and or we won't really have a strategy for how do we deal with those lower energy parts of the day. The other thing I'll mention is just our own general awareness and how this relates to what we're talking about regarding habits and leadership development and culture shaping. The first top opportunity as we dive into this topic is to allow yourself some time and space to step back and even become aware of the daily habits you have in your personal operations in life and work. Are you even aware of what those habits might be? Those things that have become you've been conditioned and you've formed these habits. Again, some positive, some maybe getting in the way, but make a list of the daily habits and routines and try to identify which ones are helping to positively support that person or that outcome you're hoping for. And this is a good exercise as a team too. What are those habits that we've formed as a team? What are the ones that seem to be really helping us? And what are the ones that maybe get in our way? What are those things that get in the way, that maybe negativity or make it more difficult on you or for our team and make things harder than they really need to be? And so not only understanding our own personal biorhythm, but even taking some time to chart and be aware of what are those daily habits or routines that, again, are helping or hurting that future vision that we're trying to create. As it relates to culture shaping, you've heard me in culture shaping say, what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And again, I've done a whole episode on that idea, so you can go back and listen to it for further context. But that's when I work with teams and organizations and we're in an initiative and a project to help shape the future culture that they want as a team or as a company organization. Oftentimes we talk about this idea that since no person or no team or organization is perfect, We all have those habits, those modes of operations, those behaviors that we allow that are counter to that future that we truly want. And so sometimes what the things that we allow that are counter to what we want can linger and kind of fester and kind of become the culture. And again, no person, no team, no organization is perfect. So the idea is we have to be able to be aware and name what are those behaviors, those operations, those policies, those structures that we might be allowing to linger, so that then we can step in and say, okay, what do we need to teach differently to trigger a different reaction? And so what are the things, the new habits, the new policies, the new procedures, the new mindset, the new actions and behaviors that will help us trigger a new and positive chain reaction? So where are the opportunities within your team operations, again, however you're defining team for you, to let go of habits that you might be allowing to linger that are counter to what you want, and which are the new habits you need to teach for how you operate together as a team? And then lastly, I'll remind you about the 4 laws of habit forming. And again, thanks to James Clear for this great language around this idea of these 4 laws of habit forming. He talks about the 4 laws to help standardize new habits. And I'll share in the context of what I've talked about in the past and in thermostat cultures and as I talk about the 6 A's of leading change. Again, if you'll be familiar with my language around the change process and helping us identifying that. And again, I've done full episodes on the 6 A's if you need to go back and listen to that. But here are 4 laws of habit forming that James Clear talks about. The first one being, when you're trying to form habits, is the first thing is you want to make it obvious. You need to make it obvious. And for me, I talk a lot about clarity on what you want to change. And so we have to make it obvious. We have to be able to name what is it that we actually want to change. In the 6 A's of leading change that I talk about, the first one is assessing. And so making it obvious means we have to assess and we have to be able to identify what is it that we actually want to change. The second law that James talks about is make it attractive. If we want to set a new and form a new habit, we need to, 1, make it obvious, but then we also need to make it attractive. So, which means we've got to want to change. So when I talk about not only assessing and being clear on what is it you want to change, you have to align yourself and other people around, is this something we truly want to change? Not just in idea or concept, but are we compelled and aligned around that this is the change that we're trying to produce? The new habit has got to be attractive. It's got to be something that says, okay, I want to do that. It can't be something that then just becomes another, something we have to do that isn't attractive to us to do. The third thing is we've got to make it easy. It can't be overly complex. So we have to, again, make it obvious. We got to make it attractive to form a new habit. And then we've got to make it easy, which means don't overthink it, but just establish what's the next step. What's the next thing? And so we have to be able to identify what is that first action. And again, don't overthink it. But if we want, it's got to be obvious and clear what the change is we want. It's got to be attractive to us that we want to be willing to make the change, and then make it easy. So what's the first new action that we will begin to make it easy and establish that next action? And then the fourth law of habit forming is make it satisfying. So we got to make it obvious, we got to make it attractive, we got to make it easy, and then we got to make it satisfying. So my language, again, in the 6 A's is you need to anchor it as something that solves something for you and other people. Not just change for the sake of change, but it's got to be satisfying in the fact that it is solving a problem. It is making things easier. It is helping you get better at something. And that satisfaction comes from seeing that you are stimulating progress. So those 4 laws, again, are make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. So, as always, I'll leave you with a few questions to ponder this week as you think about the topics of these chains of habits today. What daily habits do you have that might be positively or negatively impacting your path? Again, I encourage you to make a list and just even be aware of what are those daily habits that are positively or negatively impacting how you're showing up or your own mode of operations. What conversations within your team or your operations could help teach new habits? Are there opportunities where, hey, there's an opportunity for us to teach a new way of thinking, a new habit, a new way of operating that will help us create some new habits? And then what new habit that you want to form, could you make obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying? I hope these questions give you something to think about and breathe a little good oxygen into you. As you think about, we all breathe energy into our habits every day, and some of them, again, are helping us, and some of those might be getting in the way, or sometimes we get in the habit of breathing in toxic air or toxic, habits that we've formed that make it harder on us. So this is about stepping back and being aware of what is it we want, and then are we setting up a system that's helping to support that future that we're trying to create. We know that calibrating our own personal thermostat individually or collectively as a team requires us to be able to step back and to go through those 6 A's of change, to be in relationship with each other, to get clear on what it is that we want, and then think about the actions and behaviors that will help lead us in that direction. We are the thermostats. And so we got to know what is the temperature we're trying to set, but then we're going to have to breathe oxygen into ourselves and others to show up each day and continually put the habits in place to lead and create that future culture that we want. So I hope you'll keep tuning in. We've got a great topics ahead of us on the pod coming up in the future. As always, if there's something that you think would be helpful for us to know, or an idea that you have, or any feedback to share, reach out to us, info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com. And I hope this continues to be helpful to you, and I hope you are willing to share it with the people around you. Remember, the best leaders, teams, and cultures on the planet, they stimulate progress by recalibrating their thermostat together and continuously working on their cultural fitness. How can we breathe oxygen into each other? So remember, step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.